and welcome. This is our 10th webinar in the Future Research webinar series. Really glad that you can join us today. And this session is all about the power of passive. And when you think about how much advertising and media you see in an average day, or every product you see online or in store, and how about all the content that you recently streamed and watched? The modern world bombards us with content, and the average person spends approximately 3 hours, 20 minutes every day watching content, being exposed to content online. But passive has the power to really allow us to understand where people go, what they do, what they see, and the impact that some of that exposure can have on them. In this webinar, we're going to take you on a bit of a journey of discovery and enlightenment to understand the power that passive data can have on supercharging our understanding of customers, consumers, audiences. All passive data is collected with consent. So all of this will either be panel-based or anonymized and fully GDPR compliant. And before I hand over and introduce our speakers, I just want to share with you a short video. And this is really just to illustrate the fact that, during a normal day, we're exposed to so much information, and this really just brings that to life. So just wait 2 seconds. So a nice illustration of just how much content we're exposed to, and I'm sure many of you can reflect on your own lives and all the content you watch. So I'm now going to hand over to our presenters. So first, we will have Samara, who's an Associate Director in our Measurement and Media Development team, who will talk to us about what people do. Ben Cookman, who's a Research Director in our Brand and Comms team, will then talk about impact. So how can we use passive to understand the impact of content that people are exposed to? Roy Patel who's a Senior Client Director in Audience Measurement, will then talk to us about the untapped future potential of passive, which is very exciting. But first of all, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Mark Flood, who's Global Innovation and Out-of-Home Lead for Audience Measurement, who's going to talk to us about where people go. Mark, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Pippa, and good afternoon, everyone. As shown in the video that was just played by Pippa, people go places, and this heavily influences how they interact with the world around them. So in the context of COVID, understanding population movement is actually more important than ever. As the spread of the virus continues to evolve, this sort of information provides greater clarity on how many people are out about and how this will, I hope, increase over time. I'm certainly saying more how often I want to go to the office and visit, and considering the commute that I actually have to get to the office in Harrow, that is not something that I would normally be saying. And certainly with lockdown 2 about to happen, yeah, it's going to take a bit of a while before I can venture there more often. So in the UK, with lockdown 2 and everything else, like everywhere else, we continue to grapple with how best to manage the spread of COVID. And this is presenting us with many challenges, as well as some opportunities, both in our business lives and personal lives too. But what can be said is that people's travel patterns greatly influence the fortunes of business. And I'll shortly talk you through some real world examples of how we have used mobility data at Ipsos. But before I actually do this, I wanted to show you how excited I get about mobility data. And even during lockdown, I continued to test new functionality in our geo-tracking app. And you can see from this screen grab, my literal field test in a green area local to me. And I'm ashamed to admit it, that I didn't know that this area existed before lockdown started. And yeah, I will definitely be visiting both that area more often in the future. So I'm sure this sort of activity, as well as those trips to the local shops, the local facilities to me, are going to become part of my next normal or new different, or whatever sort of terminology you want to call it. However, travel is generally much more extensive than my walk around a field, and this is illustrated in the animation that is playing out now. Now we can see from just 200 people how they moved around Warsaw in Poland over a 2-week period, and how almost every corner of the city was touched by this relatively small group of people. Now this was pre-COVID, but it really does demonstrate what level of understanding we can get from this type of data. So as promised, I now want to run through a number of real world examples that will hopefully inspire you to think about what is possible regardless of the sector that you actually work in. But a point worth noting before I proceed is that there's many different types of mobility data, and this sort of data can be combined with other data sources to really bring the insight to life. And through these examples, I hope that I'll prove that. Ben will also give a shout out to how he used mobility data when he presents shortly. Okay, so right, let's get this going, and I'll start with an example around crises and conflict. Now here we use satellite imagery and smartphone mobility data to provide continuous monitoring of population dynamics in a fragile environment. So we looked at the population changes of internally displaced people and how this related to the infrastructure around them and the services that they wish to access in the city of Aleppo in Syria. Now, what this image is showing on the screen is the average neighbourhood population levels and how those changed. They actually increased by 1/3 during the time of our analysis. Then this put a lot of pressure on the ability for the city to support its inhabitants, certainly as part of the city were continually destroyed and rebuilt. Now the images show how demand for the government services increased as population levels increased in the west of the city. So there's definitely a correlation between those two aspects. Now the key takeout in this example was that we were able to support the humanitarian agencies in understanding where to move the limited resources that they had at hand so that they could target it in the right area at the right time when that was needed. The second application is around protests. Now, what happened to George Floyd galvanized a social justice movement this year. And it really impacted on many countries as well as many individuals, including myself. We looked at 1,500 protests in the US, locating and categorizing them, with the results being used as a source for a front page story in the USA Today. What we did here was took mobility data from smartphones to identify increases in unusual activity. And this was combined with media sources and location verifying imagery. We supported this story with an interactive tool, which really allowed users to find their own story, targeting particular areas with the zoomable map that we provided. And if we hone in on the West Coast, you can see an example of a protest with the full breakdown of the information that we actually provided to users of this. Now, the key takeout here was that the narrative of a lot of leaders around the violence that was suggested around these protests was not supported by the analysis that we presented and that we understood. So the third and final example I'm going to talk about relates to audiences. And you can see the image here is actually a billboard. Now, this is from a city in Liverpool. And if you haven't detected from my accent, this is actually where I was born and bred. So I'm proud of this this particular location in England. Now, this form of advertising is very much dependent on people driving or walking past these locations. So combining traditional travel surveys with the broader understanding that smartphone mobility data offers, we can adjust audiences and the estimates of those more dynamically and in line with the actual travel that occurred. So we move from Liverpool to somewhere equally glamorous, I would argue. You can see in this image how road traffic in the capital city of Paris in France increased by 72% post-lockdown. Now, it's variable across the different cities across that country, but we were able to observe those changes and report on those and act accordingly. The key takeout here was the recognition of traffic back on the roads, which allowed campaigns to be planned and monetized in line with audience estimates that reflected actual travel, as opposed to the perceived thinking that there were very few people out and about, because this simply wasn't true. So that's it from me, and I'll now hand over to Samara, who will build further on what people do in relation to media audiences and the influence of COVID. So thank you very much.
So hello everyone, my name is Samara, and I will now show you how we use a passive meter to understand media behavior. So this is possible due to our passive technology, which is in a form of an app that is downloaded on people's own smartphones. It is designed to run on the background of their devices, so once they install the app, very little intervention is needed. The way it works is that we get monitored via two passive meters. One is our media cell, which is our audio meter, where we are able to detect any TV or radio activity via our audio matching or encoding technology. And the next one is Reality Mine, which is our online meter, where we are able to detect any digital activities across any devices. So by combining these two meters, we are able to have people's own smartphones becoming a personal meter and producing minute-by-minute data for us across any platforms they use at any time of their day. So to give you more a practical example, I will introduce you to our case study for the BBC. So Compass is our cross-media measurement project delivered by Ipsos for the use of the BBC. So this project uses a single source panel where we use our passive technology to track what people are doing in terms of TV, radio, and online services across the entire UK population. But firstly, why would the BBC need a cross-media project. So, as you know, the BBC has a massive presence on the UK media ecosystem with different services available across different types of platforms. And the way the media industry works at the moment is that we have one media currency to measure each media type. And what they didn't have is something that could bring all of this together. So something that could provide a holistic view of the BBC with the total reach and time spent of the BBC among the UK population. Also, Compass is able to provide the overlap usage between services. For example, someone that watches BBC One TV that also accesses BBC News website or listen to BBC Sounds app. So, as I mentioned previously, the output that we are able to provide is a unified data set that can track an individual journey across the entire day. So, as you can see here in this chart, we are able to do a direct comparison between the three media types from the moment someone is waking up until they go back to sleep. And more importantly, the fact that we are able to measure TV, radio, and online from a single source panel means we can also identify simultaneous consumption behavior, which are like those moments when you are watching TV and at the same time interacting with your social media posts in your smartphone. Also, in terms of passive measurement, we have remained completely unaffected during COVID-19, so it definitely has proved its value. Because with the pandemic, many other measurement surveys have been put on hold, and we've been able to track performance and understand the big change that happened in media usage. So as you can see in this chart here, the blue line is showing what happened, what usually happens on the consumption pattern for media across a regular period, and this is for the first quarter of 2020. And the yellow line is illustrating what happened on the week commencing on the 23rd of March, when the government announced lockdown. So as you can see, it's a massive spike in media consumption. And we can see what people have started doing as a result of lockdown. We could go deeper and understand that, because we have seen new habits coming. Like, for example, I can definitely relate that to myself, because I started watching YouTube fitness classes during my lunchtime and also listening to much more podcasts in my daily walks. So in terms of media shifts, we could see that TV increased by 18%, online general activities by 28%, and social media had a massive spike with 48% increase. This is just as a result of the first week of lockdown. And in terms of websites and apps, we can see increase in fast food deliveries websites by 61%, and medical advice and hospitals by 48%. And on the other hand, we have services like maps and transport, travel and leisure, and sports being very hit by the lockdown with significant reduced. This is just a result of the first week of lockdown. Also, the lockdown had showed that we had a significant impact on the way we communicate to each other. As an example, I have been calling my family in Brazil much more often than ever, just to make sure they are doing okay and that they are safe. And I'm clearly not alone, because the data is showing an impressive 143% increase in video and voice calls as people started to find new ways to remain connected to each other. So, in short, a key takeaways for you to remember when we talk about passive metering. One is that we are able to provide a very accurate and granular information, producing minute-by-minute data across 365 days a year. We are also able to provide longitudinal tracking, as we build a continuous panel that can track an individual behavior change over time. We are able to provide insightful analysis for media strategies, so we can go beyond the traditional metrics of reach and time and understand things like overlap between services and also simultaneous consumption. We provide a seamless experience to our panelists. So once they install the app, as I mentioned in the beginning, it's designed to run on the background of their phone so they can forget about it and remain completely unaffected during COVID-19. And finally, it's also complementary to other methods. So we can use the passive meter to understand if someone has been exposed to a specific content and then do a follow-up survey to measure the impact, which is what my friend Ben is going to cover now in his section. Over to you, Ben.
So up to now, you've been given a flavour of how we use passive, not just to monitor where people go through geolocation, but also to passively track the kinds of media they're exposed to. So I'm going to tell you a bit more about how we specifically apply this to help advertisers to understand the effectiveness of their campaign. So I'll talk about how we apply a survey as well alongside passive to do that, and then take you through a short case study to bring this to life. And the really great thing about using passive alongside survey to help advertisers evaluate campaign impact is that really we can provide insights that combine these three key components. So first of all, audience data. We know that when advertisers are paying money for campaigns and putting stuff out there, it's a bit hard to know exactly who they're reaching. Is their content being seen by the right people and the right target audience for the brand? So with passive, this is something that we can definitely provide. And then the behavioral data. So using the same technology as Mark and Samara have described, we can help advertisers to understand in real granular detail what people have seen on TV and radio and out of home. I know myself that even as a researcher in the brand and advertising area, it's really hard to remember everything I've seen. So to a survey respondent, it's even harder. So using that passive data is really powerful to help us to know what people have seen. And then the kind of unique part of this compared with the other ways we use passive is that to evaluate advertising campaigns, we also ask a survey at the end of the campaign. So this would be based around just asking key questions about the brand. Would they consider buying? Are they aware of it? And then using the passive data that we collect on the advertising exposure, that's how we can really provide some powerful insights on how effective the campaign has been. So like I say, I'll take you through a quick case study to demonstrate how we have gone about doing this in the past. So this was actually an award-winning campaign I'm very proud to talk about. It was run with in partnership with OMD to use passive to evaluate the effectiveness of Google's advertising campaign for Google Home Hub, which is the product you can see there. So this was run in Q4 around Christmas time and Black Friday, promoting that product. So I'll tell you a bit about what we found and what the key takeaways for the client were on this. So we learned a lot about the campaign reach and impact. First of all, we actually found that 87% of our target audience claimed to have, well, not claimed, sorry, were passively exposed to the campaign, and that we can also help to understand what the crossover is between certain different types of activity within that. So great validation that the campaign was being seen by the people that the client wanted it to be. And as well as just a pure read on how many have seen something, we can also tell exactly when people have seen it. So this was really useful in helping to demonstrate exactly how the reach and frequency of the advertising was phased over the campaign. So it was planned to really build up to a key date of Black Friday, which took part in this. So we were able to show how much exposure had been built up by that point. And then also the impact on the people's awareness and inclination to buy the brand. So in this case, the research showed that there was a real sweet spot for people who were exposed to content at least 6 or more times, and that's where we really found the greatest impact on brand awareness. So it's really useful for the client to take away to help them to plan for future campaigns. And then those key takeaways. So first of all, it really helped them to sync their activity. So as well as the fact that the campaign reached 87% of the target audience, we're also able to help show how much crossover there was. For example, with retailer advertising that was also talking about the same product. So for this in future, it really helped them to optimize their budget, make sure they weren't overlapping too much, and to save money by planning more effectively. Next was phasing around that key date of Black Friday. So we found that in terms of the phasing of the campaign, it was delivering still quite a lot of exposure even after that key date that was being planned for. So for future planning, we could make sure that the campaign was phased in such a way that it really built up to that crescendo of activity around the key date that the campaign was planned for. And finally, as mentioned, we know exactly who has seen what and where those real sweet spots of kind of campaign frequency are. So the learning for this was to make sure that they maximized exposure to the most effective pieces of advertising. So in this case, for the subsequent campaign, it was about keeping the 30-second version of the ad rolling throughout the whole campaign, given that it was the one that had really created the most impact in this piece of research. So that gives you an idea up to now of how we use passive for monitoring location, but also media exposure and how that can create an impact on a brand. So I'm now going to hand over to Roy, who's going to talk about what's in the pipeline for the future of passive.
Thank you, Ben. And good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Yep.
Great. So just going to put some context around some of the business opportunities of using passive data before I tell you more about a new Ipsos initiative. It's really around understanding behavior. So one of the main benefits that we see around using passive data at scale is the fact that you can actually understand what people are doing rather than what they're saying in terms of claim data. So these are real interactions for you to understand what consumers or your customers are doing online across websites, apps, or digital platforms. So it's all about understanding audiences. Who are these people? Are they men, females? By understanding ethnicity or by location? Can you segment these users in terms of, are they millennials, Gen Zs, or even are you going after a specific segment like the grey pound? And how do they compare? Are they your customers or potential customers? Understanding devices. What devices are they using? Is it a PC, mobile, or tablet? Is it at home or on the move? Is one device taking a greater share of the wallet all the time? So then do you have to then change your marketing strategy around that specific device or channel? Understanding behavior. What are people actually doing online? So this is around understanding, are they just searching? Are they shopping? Are they browsing or looking for information and content? Which sites and apps do they use and why? And how often? Finally, advertising and media. Understanding the impact of your media investments. Digital ad campaigns, offline to online, or vice versa. What works, what doesn't work, and why? Due to the sheer volume of content, sites, apps, and ads, are you able to break through the clutter? Is it effective? So these are some of the questions you can answer by using a large-scale passive data set. As Samara highlighted in the custom BBC study, since lockdown, we're spending more time online than ever before due to the pandemic. And obviously, this is going to continue into 2021. So accurate measurement becomes even more important, and this is where Ipsos IRIS fits in. Ipsos IRIS is our new syndicated audience measurement study going live in January 2021. It will provide online data collected at scale, endorsed by UKOM, which is the industry body for online audience measurement. There are a number of key fundamental pillars around Ipsos IRIS. First one being a single source panel of 10,000 individuals, where we're collecting data 24/7 across 25,000 devices, which includes tablets, PC, and mobile, and it's nationally represented in the UK. In addition to that, we also collect data from hundreds of websites. So this is basically thousands of consumers, multiple devices, millions of touch points. This provides valuable, granular content for marketers to plan and execute online and digital strategy based on real consumer interactions. Also, enhanced audiences. So going beyond just collecting demographics around age, gender, or income, we're able to build, using the online behavior, actual interest-based categorizations and personas based on real behavior. Data is then delivered on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis, allowing you to actually really understand online behavior in terms of time spent, frequency, and by time of day, and through which device, be it a PC, mobile, or tablet. The technology that we are using is what Samara mentioned before. So using a metering technology, but not only what people do online, but it's future-proofed for interaction with other media, be it audio and TV. So this will actually allow for cross-media and campaign measurement, evaluation, and tracking moving forward. So just to summarize some of the key takeaways. Based on real behavior at scale, so this is thousands of users, millions of touch points, as I mentioned before, but this can be used to really understand what consumers do in the online ecosystem and understand why. Being future ready, using state-of-the-art technology for capturing across devices, but also different media. Data integration, so embedding passive data to reinforce what customers actually say via surveys. Can it be added to verify and complement your existing research insight programs? That could be anything from brand tracking, communication research, customer experience, or enterprise feedback, or more importantly, your website and e-commerce solutions. And finally, understanding how your digital ads work in the online ecosystem. Are you reaching your target audiences within the right media budget? Ultimately, using passive data allows you to better understand your customers and your audiences so you can deliver your products, services, brand experiences, and content effectively in the online market. Thank you. Now I'm going to hand back to Pippa before we take questions.
Thank you, Roy. So a real roller coaster there of passive and the different ways that passive can be used, right the way from, as Mark started at the front, understanding people movement in times of mass disruption, right the way through to understanding what people are watching and whether they're watching things or interacting on multiple devices at the same time. And as Roy finished with there, you know, the future is, I think we haven't even begun to think about all the ways in which the kind of data that will be able to be captured can be augmented with other types of insights, whether that be survey or social media, so that we can better understand customers, consumers, audiences, and so on. So I'm just going to ask everyone to switch their cameras back on, and we'll take the slides down because we have got quite a few questions that have come in. So I'm just going to go down the chat here. Sorry, I've got a bit of a mean one for Samara. Okay, so you talked a lot about technology, but how can you capture behavior from people who don't have a smartphone or don't have access to the internet? Because we kind of assume everyone does, but I think COVID has proved, you know, I know in education that that's certainly not the case.
Yeah, that's certainly not the case. Although the penetration of internet access and smartphone ownership is really high, especially in the UK, we still need to account for people who do not access internet. Especially for the BBC, they needed to have a national representative sample, and making sure we account to these people as well. So what we do for these people, we send devices to their house, which we call PLMs, which is personal locked meters, where that we have the media cell app installed, which is the TV and radio activities that we are still able to detect. So in this case, they don't have a smartphone, but they use our personal meter, and we ask them to carry on with them all the time. So we're still able to measure any TV and radio activity, and we have a representative sample of these people in our panel as well.
Okay. So we can get around even lack of technology in people's home by having something that we can scalably put into there. Now, I'm trying to be fair because I've got a couple of other questions for Samara. But Ben, what types of advertising can you track passively?
So we've up to now been doing it with TV and radio mainly, so that uses the same audio recognition that Samara spoke about that we do for the BBC. And it's also been done with out of home using geolocation, so we can map where people go versus the sort of out of home advertising infrastructure, and be able to use the data to tell how likely it is that people have walked or driven past certain advertising spots. So the ones we've done it with so far, digital is more of a future thing. There's certainly a big appetite to do it, but there's technical and privacy limitations that have made it a bit more of a challenge. But we hope at some point in the future that digital will be part of it. I don't know if Roy wanted to chip in there as well.
Yeah, what I would say is, yeah, I mean, obviously we meet all the guidelines, GDPR and data privacy guidelines. So digital can be captured, obviously understanding websites, apps, but I suppose the key question is being able to do it with consent, but also being able to work with the platforms, because a lot of the walled gardens are very difficult to track. So that's where the difficulty can be.
Okay, thanks Ben, thanks Roy. Mark, a question for you. You mentioned about different types of data. What are the different types of mobility data that we can use or have access to?
Yeah, so with regard to this, and it's more broadly applicable across data, is all these sources are not created equal. So we really have to know what the value is and what the limitations is for each of the data sets, so that we align correctly with the objectives. So they kind of fall into two camps though. One is first party data collection, in which we recruit a representative sample of participants. We place an app with them or a metered device with them, a bit of hardware. So the granularity and the accuracy on both of those are different. So it really depends what we want to get out of it. The other sources are third party, and there's mainly two sources of that. One is telco operator data, and the other is app data that, in a lot of apps, publisher apps, there's light touch geo-tracking in the background, so you get a general feel for where people are going and what they're doing. So those sorts of data sets are kind of good for macro level understanding and movement. So yeah, it depends what we need, but there's a whole set of mobility data there that we can choose from. Okay,
so kind of horses for courses as well, in terms of how much detail you need on where people are going. And Roy, coming back to you, because IRIS is really exciting, and it's a huge project. But will other people be able to get access to Ipsos IRIS? The kind of data. How does that work, or how do people?
Great question. IRIS is going live in January, but it's based on a syndicated data collection point of view. So it's actually a service that can be provided to everyone on a subscription basis, I suppose. So it can be bought. We're providing access to the data on an annual basis. So people can sign up and get access to data over a 12-month period or even longer, based upon the needs. But it's available to everyone. We see agencies, publishers, platform providers, as well as brands utilizing the data to help them within understanding what I would call the UK online digital market, from a granular perspective, but also from a micro macro perspective as well.
Okay, great. And Samara, I'm just going to jump back to you, because the BBC work, I don't think I'd ever stop to think about how many different touch points the BBC had in that way. But how big, for example, is the kind of BBC Compass panel to do that kind of work that you've done for them?
Yeah, so the BBC panel is like a continuous panel. So we have this set up for 4 years already, and we've been able to deliver weekly data for them. And in terms of sample size, we have a reporting sample of 3,000 every week. And this is can be specific by each week because it depends if people are following our compliance rules. So we have a set of compliance rules that people need to achieve in order for them to become an active panelist in the sample. The other thing that is really important to mention is that for the BBC, it's very key to have a robust sample to read specific subgroups. For example, young people, the nations and regions, so Northern Ireland, Wales, also in terms of ethnicity, they want to be able to have strategic numbers to take decisions, and that's what Compass is able to do with this weekly sample of 3,000.
Okay, thanks, Samara. And
No
I realise time's ticking on because we're due to finish shortly. I'll just, bounce back to you, Ben, looking through these. Let me go to this one. Can you track competitor advertising as well? You know, you talked about doing a project for a specific brand.
Yeah, that's definitely possible. As long as we have the ads in advance, we can set the software up to, it's kind of like Shazam. It knows what it's looking for at that point, and then you can track exposure to any competitor. So we've done it with, again, around Christmas time, where there's lots of other competitor brands active in the market, and tracked the exposure to their activity and be able to see if that's making an impact as well. It works in pretty much the same way, as long as we, like I say, as long as we know in advance.
Cool. Well, thank you ever so much. A packed panel today, lots of information to absorb. So thank you everyone for joining, and thank you panel. We've just got 2 webinars left of the 12. There's one tomorrow, which is on digital personas and how we can use a digital understanding of people's profile or groups of people to inspire communication. And then on Thursday, we have Finger on the Pulse about customer and consumer. And we were designing these webinars when we were hoping that we would be out of this by the end of the year. So this is almost more important than ever, because a lot of those approaches that we use to keep our finger on how people are feeling, what they're doing, what they're thinking, is going to be critical as we go into the next lockdown. So hope you could join us for those. There will be recordings of these, which will be put on the futureofresearch.ipsos.com website. These will probably be uploaded in the next week or so. But thank you ever so much for joining us, and thank you again to the panel. Bye.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.